enough to enjoy it. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Lynn?
Lynn Brown, and I am from Curtis Park Neighbors. And one of my favorite things to do is go to First Friday Jazz at Sunny Lawson Park on the first Friday all summer long. 5:30 to 7. It's really fun and all free.
Nice. Stan?
Stanton Shell. Is RNO Residential Neighborhood Organization? What does that stand for, RNO?
Oh, yeah, Registered Neighborhood Organization, yeah.
Organization.
Or
So
neighborhood.
I'm not part of an RNO. I just live in Modo. And my favorite thing to do in the summer is probably take RTD down up to Boulder to watch Colorado Shakespeare Festival plays.
Excellent. Cincinnati?
Sensory Eats. I'm Assistant Director of Planning, Design, and Construction for Parks. I specifically oversee urban ecology and trails. My favorite thing to do is definitely just be outdoors and camp and hike and just be in nature.
Perfect. Greg?
Greg Sorensen, Cheeseman Park area, Neighbors for Greater Capitol Hill. And I'm not sure it's my favorite thing, but I've been volunteering like 6 to 8 hours a week in Cheeseman Park, doing maintenance that the city doesn't have people to do, and then taking care of rose beds by the pavilion.
Well, thank you for doing that. Jane, did you get the instructions?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, got lost tonight. Hi, everybody. My name is Jane Potts, and I co-chair this committee with the wonderful Adam, who does all of the heavy duty work. So thanks, Adam, for constantly being on top of it all. I'm fortunate enough to live at Rosedale Harvard Gulch, and I love that park. I walk it almost every single day, and every day it's different, even though it's the same route and the same trees and the same places, the little pond and the small golf course. And we've got a couple little waterfalls, and there's different animals scattering around, and every day it's different, even though it's the same. And I just feel very privileged to live in such a lovely neighborhood.
Great. Dean? Or maybe Jody?
I'm Jody Arnold, and I live in the Polo Grounds. And what I really like to do is garden and be involved in gardening projects. I serve on the ACC committee, which is a huge, huge job determining what happens with building projects, landscaping, etc. for our homeowners association.
Great. And Dean, you were able to get unmuted. All right. I think we'll come back to you. All right, let's get started. Yolanda, you want to see if you can take the screen?
Sure, I think it's actually going to be Sensory.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, you want to see if you can take the share screen? You know where it is on the bottom in the middle?
Yes, just a minute. Okay, let me know when you can see that.
You can see it. So far, so good.
Is it coming up? It's still showing black for me, but if it's showing up for people.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Got it. Okay.
All right, it's all yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us. We're really excited to share some of the work that we've been doing in parks around climate adaptation, and then kicking off this new campaign to promote a lot of the work that we're doing and engage residents on how they can get involved. So I'll just quickly give a quick background on Game Plan for a Healthy City for those who might not be familiar with our 20-year strategic plan that guides a lot of the work that we do in parks, some of our specific resiliency efforts, and then Yoli will provide an overview of the campaign. So as part of the Game Plan for a Healthy City, There are 4 guiding principles that really guide our work. And the pillar that we really focus on in a lot of the resiliency efforts is every drop. But essentially everything we do cuts across all of the principles, and ensuring that not only are we being sustainable in the work that we're doing, but ensuring that we're providing equity across the city and where we're investing our legacy funds and general fund dollars, and also where we're prioritizing some of our resiliency efforts, being very diligent and ensuring that we're making the right investments in the right places, and then also continuing to preserve what makes Denver unique. So the every drop pillar is what really embodies, again, like all the work that we're doing. And so we're really focused on preserving and enhancing Denver's natural resources. And so Denver was a prairie when we settled here. And so we're really trying to ensure that we're preserving that habitat and the wildlife qualities that make Denver interesting and healthy, not only for our environment, but for the people that interface with our park spaces. So we do a lot of work to reduce our irrigation while also restoring these landscapes, our lakes and streams. You talked about Harvard Gulch. That's an area that, you know, we spend a lot of time preserving and restoring as well, all to make sure we're increasing biodiversity within the city. And so once the game plan was complete, the department wanted to increase the capacity and the work that we were doing in this area. So they created what we used to call the resiliency program. We now have kind of rebranded to urban ecology. And we work across all the different functional areas. Like I mentioned, I'm in planning, design, and construction, but we work very closely with our operations team and forestry and recreation to make sure that we're embedding this work into everything that we're doing, and we're finding ways to engage with the community and communicate about a lot of this work as we start to see some of these landscapes changing in our parks. And I think, you know, now is the time. I think we've seen a lot of unprecedented weather changes this year. We've had extreme heat and we've also had extreme storms. And so how are we adapting our park system to absorb some of these stressors, while also, again, still making them fun and engaging places for our community to visit? And we heard from a lot of the respondents in the game plan planning study phase that our residents, like 71%, said that parks does need to play a role in adapting our park system and conserving water and increasing biodiversity. And so we've heard our residents clearly, and we are looking at how we can change policies to, say, reduce turf in parks in areas where it's underutilized for recreation, and setting new policies to kind of limit the use of that. And so we just passed a turf grass policy that I'd be happy to share that kind of outlines how we're going to implement that work. And then let's see. And so again, a lot of these themes were elevated throughout kind of our prioritization process with the community. And so again, like I mentioned before, resiliency cuts across all the work that we're doing in the department, from, again, ecosystem restoration to how people and children are accessing nature. And so how we're creating those spaces to have nature in the city, all the way to research and evaluating emerging trends and how we're utilizing our academic community around us to make sure that we're applying lessons learned and continuing to adapt the way we're doing the work as we move forward. So yeah, we're doing a lot of exciting work. I don't have time to talk about all the work that we're doing, but Yoli's going to touch a little bit on some of the focus areas that go into a little bit more detail on some of the work specifically that we're going to focus on as part of the campaign.
So as part of this work, you know, things are gonna start to look different, and we're really as a department being intentional with the strategies that we are undertaking to become a more resilient park system. And with that, we just wanted to make sure that we took the time to raise awareness about what the city is doing, to focus on becoming a more resilient park system, and to educate residents about these changes, about these strategies that we're doing. And sometimes it's in the background where people might not know what we're doing when it comes to water conservation, or might not know what we're doing or why we're doing, landscape transformations. And so we want to start to raise awareness of the efforts and why we're doing the work we're doing. And so if you go to the next slide. So as Sensory mentioned, the campaign is going to focus on 5 areas specifically. So the first one is habitat protection. And we're really looking at this being, from the bison in our mountain parks to the bees and butterflies in all our parks. The next one is environmental stewardship, and really looking at how people can get involved in doing their part to maintain our park system. And we see that Greg already is a great example of people who take the time to be good stewards of our park system. Water conservation, so being intentional with our most precious natural resource. Landscape transformation, and what we're calling Colorado-scaping, which is looking at landscape that is appropriate to this area, and something that is just climate appropriate. And then urban forests, so keeping the city cool by investing in our tree canopy. So these are the 5 focus areas of the campaign. And Sensory, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on these focus areas.
No, I'll just mention that we will take a deep dive into each of these individually, but we do recognize that these all play off of one another. They're all interconnected. And so we'll be talking about, as we're talking about water conservation, we're going to be talking about native landscapes and the urban forest. And so just know that we're going to talk about how they're integrated throughout the process as well.
Mm-hmm. Good point. So then looking at the next slide at our campaign strategy. So as Sensory mentioned, each month we will focus on a particular topic. So, but knowing that they are interrelated, but we'll be pushing out, we have already started to push out content on these focus areas. And so we're primarily leveraging DPRs, social media channels in our spaces and facilities. So digital boards in our rec centers, banners in our parks, posters in our rec centers. And we're also tapping into some of the citywide social media channels. We are tapping into some of the digital boards downtown. So areas that we can partner with organizations to kind of get this message across. We are also making this content available to City Council so that they can share the information and resources with their constituents, as well as, we are pushing the information to RNOs and partner organizations and asking them to share with their communities as appropriate. So the next slide. So looking at the campaign itself, the campaign is entitled It's in Denver's Nature. And this is really, connecting the campaign not only to the physical attributes of Denver's natural environment and our parks and open spaces, but how our respect for nature is really what binds us in our shared love for Denver, and how each of us can do our part to care for our slice of the city. So it's in our nature. That's what we're tapping into. And so this landing page, which is denvergov.org/nature, will serve as really the hub of the campaign. So the goal is to continue to populate this page with relevant information on these 5 topics. And so whether it's events that are happening, like tree giveaways, or resources on how somebody can Colorado-scape their own backyard, or even just educational information, such as the benefit of native grasses, we're populating this web page so that it could be a hub for the campaign and for these 5 focus areas. So then a little bit of what hopefully you'll start to see in the community. This group of material highlights the focus area of landscape transformation. So looking at perfect lawns are out, native grasses are in, and really talking about the benefit of native grasses. You'll start to see, the poster is on the left. And then the digital boards, one of the examples of the digital boards is on the upper right. And then you'll see like banners that will go into some of our parks on the lower right. And so just getting the message out there, but again, connecting people back to the website. And so this is an example of signage focused then on the water message. Use less, help Denver more. We're also pushing information out, as I mentioned, on social media. So starting to highlight some focus areas there. We'll also, looking at the next slide, we also have stickers. DPR is often out in the community. So just having stickers to connect people back to the campaign and back to the website. So making these available for the community. We are also launching our first podcast, and this will really allow us to dive deeper into a specific topic, things that you can't necessarily synthesize on a social media post or even a newsletter article or our website, but just really understanding the why behind things, the history of things, understanding like how did we get here, and how are we, just being intentional with what we're doing. So look out for our first podcast, and this first one, as you can see, features Sensoray and Gordon Robertson, who is our Director of Planning, Design, and Construction. And then, so just very quickly on, what you can expect, as we mentioned, monthly content. The next one is environmental stewardship, and really starting with looking at, DPR employees as the first stewards of our park system and open spaces, but also what is the department doing as it relates to workforce development and really starting to nurture the next generation of park stewards. And then looking at volunteer opportunities, and then also highlighting the leave no trace concepts. So something that everyone can do to be a better park steward when they visit a park, and kind of leaving it better than you found it. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we're doing, and then the campaign on educating the community on why we're doing it and how they can get involved. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm open to any thoughts, questions, ideas.
Fantastic. Thanks, Yolanda and Sincere. Do we have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Not putting you on the spot, or you can put it in the chat. I don't see anything in the chat right now. I have a question, couple questions, but I'll start with mine, and then maybe if there's other people they can ask. Can individual RNOs reach out to you if they're interested in having you educate their constituents? I know you're early on in this campaign.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I mentioned, we are pushing the information out to the RNOs, and but if there is an interest in seeing how this relates specifically to your RNO, we can make our best effort to attend.
Okay, and are you working with the Climate Action and Sustainability and Resiliency Office, the CASR office?
We definitely have several projects where we're working closely with them. Sensory can probably speak more specifically to like the projects piece of it.
Yeah, they're not I mean, we've presented this information to them as far as our campaign, but we do partner with them on a lot of the work that we do related to these focus areas. So I think, I mean, Elizabeth can speak to some of the partnerships on growing our urban forest. We've partnered on growing our workforce development programs. So yeah, there's a couple of good examples.
Solar panels in our recreation centers.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and then maybe even I heard that you're partnering with DPS to put solar panels in some of their parking lots. Some of the school parking
Yes,
lots.
sir.
Is that happening? Do you know about that?
I can't definitively say yes. I don't work on DPS property, but we could follow up and or put you in touch with their program lead for that.
Okay, yeah, I actually know her, but I was curious if there was any movement on that. Jane has a question.
Hi, I was just curious. We do have the solar panels in the parking lot at Harvard Gulch. I'm also wondering, what are the other neighborhoods that you're focusing on at this time? What other parks?
Specific to like our resiliency efforts.
Anything. I'm just sort of curious which parks are getting your major attention right now.
I mean, I feel like every park. It depends. I mean, we have a capital planning 5-year plan that prioritizes like where different parks need upgrades. When it comes to our resiliency work, you know, we work closely with operations and are coming up with a prioritization process for where we're going to go in and do some of these retrofits over the next few years. So a couple of examples are City of Takayama and Carmel and Cherry Creek. That park has very old irrigation and is very inefficient. And so we're going to go there and upgrade the irrigation and convert some of that landscape. We're actually going to be converting the Quebec medians between I-70 and MLK. If you've driven on Quebec through the kind of Central Park, Northfield neighborhood, there's those expansive medians of just turf grass that aren't utilized. So those are 2 project examples.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. Keith, you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. Getting back to the game plan for a healthy city, where is the priority right now on the 10-minute to a park walk access or walk or roll access issue?
Yeah, actually, so as part of the Legacy Fund, the tax initiative that was passed in late 2018, we were able to develop an acquisition fund as part of that. And then we just finalized a strategic acquisition plan that I can share a link in here in just a moment that you can go and take a look at. But I can't remember, Yoli, if you remember off the top of your head, but we've acquired several acres in the urban system and a couple of 100 acres in our mountain parks just within the last few years with that funding source. So the 10-minute walk or roll is the primary priority to a quality park, but we also have a waterway and resiliency focus area as well. So there's 5 different focus areas. And so, like I said, I'll send you that plan to take a look at. And if you have any questions, I can put you in touch with our planning manager.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much for presenting this to us. This will go out to the wider Universe of Denver Inc. online too. And I'm going to pass it off to
If I can really quickly, just since it's being mentioned, you know, Sensory mentioned the Park Legacy Fund. It was first approved in 2018 we are in the process of starting community engagement for the next 5-year plan. So the first meeting is a virtual meeting coming up September 14th, I believe. We can send the information on the first meeting, and then we have open houses scheduled for the end of September. And so that's the beginning of starting to hear back from the community of what are the priorities as it relates to the legacy fund and game plan and where we should be investing park dollars. So I encourage you to participate in that process.
Perfect. So it sounds like we're right on time for that.
I'm sorry, do you have any information about when those meetings are going to be?
Yeah, I'm happy to put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, there definitely might be some people on here that are over volunteers that would love to join you, including me. Okay, are we good?
Adam, I have one question.
Yeah,
I know that in the recent past anyway, Parks and Rec has increased their ecology staff. And I was wondering where that staff is getting started in terms of converting turf, if it's just the 2 places you mentioned, or if there are other places in the system.
So that's my team. I oversee the urban ecology program. And I can send a list of projects. Some are not fully funded yet, and they're more in the planning stages. And we've been developing kind of a site identification process because we want to be very strategic in where we're going into communities and parks to convert landscapes. And then we want to include a community engagement process as part of that. So I'm happy to follow up with, I put the denvergov.org/nature website link in the chat, and we're going to also include a list of projects as we start to plan and design more, so you can check that site as well. But I can put a couple in the chat if that would be helpful.
So we have a group of park stewards that actively work in all 3 parks in Curtis Park neighborhood, and we have some areas that would be really ripe for the conversion to a lot of the native plants and grasses. Is there any way we can request to be considered for an upcoming project?
Yes, we have received a lot of communications from different community members on project ideas. So you're welcome to submit those, and we will vet them and reach out if we have any questions and put them on the list. I just can't say for sure like how they'll be prioritized and when funding would be available to those, but we're definitely collecting community driven project requests.
And is that on your website?
yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, you can, I'll put my email in the chat as well, and you can just send them directly to me.
Great, thank you. Keith, do you have another question?
I do. I apologize to everyone. I'm going to probably slow this up a little bit. But I'm looking at this parkland acquisition program guide right now and at some of the proposed projects. And I'm trying to I just want to understand the thinking a little bit under, I know that there's this inverted L that, the city is focusing on in terms of, developing in these nest neighborhoods and whatnot. And I'm not seeing that there's a lot of projects that are like focused on that. And right now in developing more of those spaces in those communities. And I'm just wondering if there's a conversation about that that's been had, or if there's just not available land. Like I live close to Sloan's Lake, so I drive down Federal all the time and I see in places like Valverde and Sun Valley, like all this, land that's, likely going to be converted into, housing stock. But there are spaces that seem available for parkland as well. And just wondering if that's at all part of the conversation in kind of building out the park system in these neighborhoods that need them.
I mean, that's the main priority. is focusing in our higher equity needs communities. And we do take, similar to we were just talking to Lynn about, we do take community requests. If you identify a site, you can send it to the parks planning team and they will evaluate if it if it falls within that 10-minute walk shed where we have a deficit, and we'll evaluate it. So you can, if you see something that's a great opportunity, you can send it our way for evaluation.
Okay.
See something, say something, Keith.
Yeah, if I got like another $10 million in the pocket that I can find some land.
That's also a big factor is how land is not cheap in Denver. So even for us,
Yep.
we have to pay the same market value.
All right, thank you.
So the good news about tonight is we have time, which is great. We've asked a lot of questions. We've got some good answers. I think we're gonna move on now to Elizabeth, who's probably just ready to jam here. And we're gonna talk about her area of expertise. Thank you again, both of you, Yolanda and Sincere. And we'll see you soon. You can hang out if you want, or you can go have dinner, one or the other. Thanks.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you want to take the screen? Can you share screen?
Yeah, I will. Hopefully you are seeing presentation here. So I don't have too many slides, but I'll share a handful. Let me know if you're having any volume or screen sharing issues. So the first thing I like to do anytime I talk to someone about city forestry is just do a high level overview. What is the city forest? What do we talk about? What do we do on a routine basis? This is a map of all the canopy in the city. You'll have to forgive me because I did cut off part of DIA up in the upper right. And that's in part because there's very low canopy, very few trees in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood really actually impacts our overall canopy numbers. We have about 11% tree canopy citywide. If you drop DIA out of that, it goes up to about 15. There is a current game plan goal of reaching 20%. And we believe that we are seeing some increases in our overall canopy. I'm really looking forward to getting the next set of data on canopy. We get flyovers every 2 years. And I want to make sure that that trend really is going up. It is small enough that it's within margin of error for anybody who works in the numbers world. So I'm always a little hesitant to say, oh yes, we're gaining, but it looks that way. And you can see there are some pretty big differences depending on neighborhood. All the black lines are neighborhoods for anybody who doesn't look at this on a regular basis. And when you zoom in, you can really see differences. And so this is Central Park and Country Club labeled. These are at the same scale. And you can see Central Park's quite low. It's actually one of our lowest neighborhoods, a little under 4%. Country Club is the highest at over 37. And there's an interesting detail when we look at neighborhoods and canopy and potential for tree planting. Central Park is essentially planted out. There are very few vacant feasible planting sites, but most of the trees are small and it has really tough soils, and so there's slow growth. So I think it's important to remember that anytime you hear a forestry staff or a member of the public start throwing out numbers, we always want to dive a little deeper and really look at what other layers might be influencing trees and canopy. It's also really important to remember that canopy isn't the only thing we look at. It's a metric. It's helpful to understand overall trends, but it's not everything when it comes to urban forestry. We are really focused on overall tree diversity in the city. And that is both diversity around species, diversity in size, and a healthy forest will have diversity in condition. So I just listed our top 10 species over on the left. You'll notice ash for anybody who is familiar with BASA, be a smart ash. Ash remains high in the city, but it is actually again going down. We were higher when we started BASA in 2016. You'll notice the second most common tree are maples, and a lot of people moved here from New England, from the East Coast. They love the idea of great fall color, and so they've planted a lot of maples, and we have quite a high percentage right now. So we'd like to see these numbers shift and redistribute a little bit. Best practice for urban forestry says we really shouldn't have more than 10% in any genus. So we're not quite where we want to be, but again, working towards shifting that in everything we do. The screenshot on the right is from the city's inventory software, Davy Tree Keeper. You can see there's a breakdown of condition. We're doing pretty good, literally. The big blue wedge is good in terms of tree condition. We also have some very poor and some dead. And so those are definitely trees we want to pay attention to. I do want to point out that the city does not maintain detailed inventory of private trees. So anything you see on this software, and it is publicly accessible for anybody who's interested, for anybody who hasn't been on it. If you're interested to see what is a street tree, what is a park tree, is it public? You can get online and search, and or if you just want to look up a species or a condition rating, you can do that as well. So no private trees on this inventory. Right now we have about 80,000 trees in parks and about 220 in the public right-of-way. That does include parkway trees and some trees that are maintained by the city. I want to show you a few historic images, and I think these images tell a little bit of a story. So this is downtown. You can see the clock tower just center right. And this is 1920s, relatively low structures. Not too many trees in this photo. No, it's black and white, but if you really start looking at streets, you'll see there just aren't openings and gaps for trees. You can see a spear in the upper left, and that's where you start seeing some trees along the creek. And then this is late 60s, early 70s. So this is when nationally you saw a real trend for parking lots, demolition of historic buildings, high rises. You can see the clock tower again, just center left, and spear and the creek in the upper right. So this is a slightly different orientation, but same general location. And again, a few more trees, but not too many. And then this is pretty close to that same view, same orientation today. So certainly a lot more construction, but actually a lot more green too. And I show this in part just to illustrate that landscape, green space, trees, they do change over time. And I think sometimes when we talk about forestry and forests, change is slow, hard to perceive. And I always think this is a good reminder of just how much our built environment does change over time. And trees are part of that. So a little bit about how forestry is structured. We are divided into two teams, forestry field operations. And so this is the team that actively maintains and manages all of the city parks, parkways, facilities. They get involved in park construction and plan review. They actively plant, do rotational pruning and overall health care. And they have a dedicated headquarters site down on Huron for anybody who might know that location. And then to complement that, there's another team, which you'll hear referred to as regulations or inspections. And this is the team that's focused on public street trees. And so the city does not, for the most part, maintain public street trees. That maintenance is the adjacent property owner's responsibility. There are some programs underway right now, some exceptions to that in some of the high need equity neighborhoods. We can talk a bit more about that if anybody's interested. We do actively inspect public street trees. We want to make sure that they're safe, that there are no life safety, public safety issues. We also run BASA, the Be a Smart Ash program. And I've discovered recently that a lot of people know of the program, but don't fully perhaps understand everything it includes. So it's not only ash treatment and inspection, it's also the city's free street tree planting program. So for anybody that has space in the right of way, they can get a tree planted at no cost and a couple of years of watering, as well as any information or health care needed in that first couple of years. This team also reviews all of the development in the city, all of the construction projects. So they actively work towards planting and preserving public street trees associated with development. And they have some ability to protect private trees in residential street setbacks. I think it's also important to note at this stage that we estimate that 85% of all the trees in the city are on private property. About 15% are public. There's a 2013 study that came up with a number for all of the trees in the city. And again, this is remote sensing. It's not a detailed inventory. People were not on site on property. But that number was 2.2 million. So 2.2 million trees estimated across the city, about 300,000 being public. And I suppose I should say my role also falls into this team. And then I'd like to spend just a couple minutes and talk about one of the really big tasks that I have for the year. Denver has not historically had a dedicated master plan or vision plan or strategic plan. So we are working on the city's first urban forest strategic plan. It started in January. We're trying to finish it up in just about a year. And we are just about to conclude our second outreach and very early alternatives development phase. We do have an open survey for anybody who has a few minutes. We'd love responses to that. The first survey closed in May. Was pretty high level, general questions around preferences, knowledge on trees. If people saw trees as infrastructure, really interesting question and response rate, very, very positive on that one. So the rest of the year is going to be spent really refining these alternatives. We've had 2 open houses, 2 surveys, a whole series of internal stakeholder interviews, multiple outreach public events. I think I said 2 open houses, one of which was at Montbello last weekend, where we got to hang out and talk to quite a few people passing through another event. And we just concluded a series of 10 focus group discussions, real diversity in those focus groups as well. Different residential groups, geographic locations, some business, mixed business residentials, dedicated business, really great in-depth discussion, trying to tease out feedback that we received early in the process. And so we will have one more open house this fall where we'll push out what we think the preferred alternatives are and our final recommendations. There'll be an opportunity to comment on that as well. And we're pretty excited with where it's going. We've really had just great feedback so far. For anybody who might be wondering, why do this? There are quite a few objectives in the plan. And it is a different level of detail, a different depth than what Blueprint or Game Plan has. So both talk about trees and the urban forest, but they don't go into making in-depth, necessarily actionable recommendations. And so that's really what we're looking for here. And we think the need for this plan really ties back to this map. This is the urban heat map that's published by DDPHE, Department of Public Health and Environment. And I think someone has already mentioned inverted L here. You can see where the heat is. And you can also, if you remember that first canopy map, really overlay tree canopy and urban heat and quite a few health-related challenges that come with it. So along with all of this, we're also looking at best practice research and trends. We want to learn from what other people are doing, that whole saying about not reinventing the wheel. And so these are the trends that have really risen to the top so far. We just received a draft best practice assessment report from our consultants. Really good information, dives pretty deep into 6 cities. And we're learning that some of our intuition is correct, some of past practices are correct. And then there are things that we have to evaluate moving forward and really figure out how we make some shifts. So centralized versus decentralized organization, probably not a surprise to too many people. There is variability in who maintains all city-owned trees, but there is also an emerging trend that city-maintained trees do tend to have a healthier overall forest. And we have heard this loud and clear from the public that they would like us to do more. I don't know exactly what this will look like. We're drafting that proposal right now. So we'll see what shakes out, but I do think there's going to be some shifts in maintenance responsibilities. Now with that also comes some funding gaps. So we are talking about funding, and a lot of the funding is long-term maintenance funding, not necessarily planting, but really the maintenance side. Emphasis on community involvement, trees as capital infrastructure. We asked a very direct question about, do you see trees as necessary infrastructure? And over 90% of our survey respondents said yes. We also want to really look at building public-private partnerships. We have great partners. We really want to try and see where that can go and how we support each other. And then how do we assess ourselves? And how do we measure how we're doing and whether or not we're meeting our obligations? So I think this is my last meaningful slide, but I thought I'd give you just a really brief list of what we're hearing from the public through all this outreach and engagement. We could spend a couple hours just digging into survey questions. And there is a summary of the first survey available on the OCF website. We'll certainly do the same with the second, but it is live still. So best way to see it is go take it. And I imagine, given the focus of this committee, these won't be particularly surprising to anyone, but worth noting. Benefits of trees. Certainly environmental benefits, ecological benefits were noted. But out of a list of a dozen different possible options, beauty was the #1 answer, and mental health was #4. I think the language here was they make me feel better. Forestry is currently focusing on planting in low canopy areas, but that also came back really loud and clear. We should focus on not any particular kind of area, so not park, street, school, but just anywhere that has low canopy. We have asked a lot of questions about private tree protection. This is a topic that has come up several times. There's a goal for it in the game plan, but we really needed to dig into it and see what the public would potentially support. And so far, about 70% of our public who have engaged with us would support some level of private tree protection, with limitations, not a blanket, but something. Again, trees are clearly infrastructure. Over 90% of people we engaged with agreed with that. We should expand stewardship. It is a really key component, again, to the maintenance question. We also heard a lot about enforcement. A little bit of a carrot or the stick came out to be carrot and a stick. We definitely have a public that wants us to do more around development and asking developers to do better maintenance. We've also heard pretty clearly that there is support for some kind of a fee to support additional street tree maintenance. And again, we've had some very frank discussions. We've put numbers out there. A lot of people would start out by saying, oh, I'd love you to do more maintenance, but I don't want to pay anything. And then when we start talking numbers, they're like, oh, but yeah, I'd pay this much. That would be great. And definitely more in ongoing outreach and education. Just hearing loud and clear that there are a lot of people we're not reaching, and how do we rethink that? So you might have noticed I skipped water and watering. And that is definitely a point, and I'm sure you're taking this away from Yoli and Sensory, but water is complicated, and it's going to get more complicated here. And that seems to be a sticky point for a lot of property owners. We hear really mixed feedback around people's willingness and ability to water. And so that is something that we're really trying to figure out if there are creative ways to support, incentivize, make watering easier, and also just educate. We definitely are hearing that many people don't understand the impact of watering trees here. Stopping, starting, establishment, the right amount of water, when to water. So looking at what is the outreach and education component around watering as well. And so I believe, yeah, that is my last slide. I can drop these links in the chat if it's helpful. You might see these QR codes out and about. We've handed out bags and seed packets and a few different materials with them. Anything you see that QR code on it is still live, it's dynamic. The survey is available English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, and you can toggle between languages, no matter where you start. So yeah, with that, I don't know how many questions we might have.
There are some.
I have a couple of minutes, but not a ton of time.
Yeah, there's a couple questions. Let's get through them, and if you can put the those links in the chat, that would be super helpful, because people could just click on them and then save them for later. Let me open up the chat here. I'm gonna go backwards here to what trees are you recommending for a drier, hotter climate, which is us, I guess, here in Denver.
Yeah, and so trees are almost always context specific. You'll hear a lot of us say right tree, right place. So in terms of general drought tolerant trees, Hackberry, a lot of the oaks are doing pretty well. Kentucky coffee tree, catalpa. Turkish filbert is one that we're trying out, which is a little bit smaller, more medium-sized tree. For small trees, Japanese tree lilac, serviceberry, lots of options out there, and more research being done all the time. CSU is doing research, Denver Botanic is doing research. Always a challenge though to get trees from suggestions and testing into availability in the nursery. So, anybody who does work in the landscape world, ask for things. Nurseries won't grow them if they're not getting asked for. So,
Well, and I'll give a plug to the Be a Smart Ash program because it's been awesome for me personally. We had 2 trees put in our parkway between the sidewalk and the road, and it was super easy to order them. They came, they put them right in, boom. All we have to do is water them.
yeah.
That's great. And then the thinking about what tree you need is already done by program.
Yeah, they'll give you options if you want to have some involvement in picking them for sure, but they try and not give you any options that won't do well.
I would hope so. All
Well,
right.
they get requests sometimes and it's like, oh, I no, we can't do that.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
All right. Fran asked if it's possible to plant a windbreak to the north of Trevista Horace Mann School. I don't know if you know where that is. How do they go about getting that done?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it. I can't answer that. I will say we don't have any involvement in DPS trees. So if this is actually a windbreak on DPS property, that would be a question for them. And I know they're really maintenance challenged around trees.
Can you talk for a few minutes about how the city maintains the right-of-way trees in low equity neighborhoods and versus private trees?
Two completely different questions there.
Yeah.
Right now, the city doesn't do any private tree maintenance. There is a program started by Kaiser, and they're about a year in, focusing on private tree planting. They have funding for another 2 years, and I think their goal is to plant 1,000 trees a year. And they are focused on nest neighborhoods. And they are offering establishments some establishment maintenance. We'll see if that funding continues or they get grant funding to expand it, extend it. The Forestry office has a program called Forestry Neighborhood Enhancement, or you'll also hear the name has gone back and forth, Forestry Neighborhood Initiative. And that's a little bit of money that comes out of legacy, which Century talked about, which is earmarked for hazardous removal and pruning and planting in the high need equity neighborhoods. And so they've been, and it's a pretty new program as well. I think this is the 3rd year that we've had funding. And so it did start during COVID. And I will say anything that started during COVID had a very slow takeoff. But that money is being spent. It is essentially a way to help lower income households who do have hazardous trees remove or prune those trees without passing the cost on to the homeowner. And we'll see whether or not that funding is extended into the future, if it's expanded as part of the strategic plan recommendations. But I think the feedback I've received is that it's going pretty well and certainly takes some stress off of households.
Awesome. Keith, do you want to follow up with anything you didn't hear that you wanted to?
Sorry, yeah, and my computer froze, I think, when you asked those questions, so I didn't really get the context, but I'm assuming it was kind of the first couple of questions here. Just that, just you had mentioned something about as well with in terms of maintaining trees during private development and working with developers on that. And I guess I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you were talking about, because as an RNO, or when we go to an RNO meeting, basically what we're getting is pitched every week from developers that want to come in and redo setback lines on large projects in our neighborhood. And a lot of that ends up when they move those setback lines, they're taking away large trees that have been developed on those properties. And I think it's something that we were talking about last night in a general meeting in terms of agreements that neighborhoods could have with developers in terms of how to maintain, how to possibly keep these trees when they're working on their development projects, rather than just giving to the tree fund and then getting a bunch of saplings in there.
Well, so I guess a couple of clarifications. Right now, there's no mitigation process for private trees. And in most cases, if you're talking about a larger development, more than 4 units, there's no protection at all for private trees. So it's just the lower density residential setbacks that have any private tree protection. But part of our question for the public is, should that change? I mean, should it somehow be regulated? Should developers going on to a block sized property that has a handful of really nice mature trees have to design around them? So I guess I would encourage you to take the survey and tell us that, and so we can have some direction and support. And it will be outside of forestry's purview. We will have to work with planning to see what can be done within forestry code and regulations and what can be done within zoning code.
There was, Keith, some discussion. I was part of the Denver Green Code committee, and there was some discussion about that exact issue and putting it into the building code. So I don't know if it ever got in or not, but the Denver Green Code is still voluntary and it's not mandatory.
There is a possible elective point for preserving trees.
I guess from a neighborhood perspective, what it would be nice to do is to have, at least to start with anyway, before this ends up becoming a regulatory type of issue, is to if you do have these survey results come out, that we could quote these survey results in some type of justification for our neighborhood wanting to keep these trees, and then use that as a way to negotiate with the developer on some level, at least, in saying, we won't give you our blessing for this development unless you promise to try to protect these trees that you're putting in. And I think that's something that we've talked about trying to do in a limited capacity before we would get to something like a regulation, which would obviously be much more effective.
All right. I could probably talk to you about trees all night, but I think we're gonna wrap it up. I thank everyone for coming. I know we had a little bit of a smaller crowd, but quality is better than quantity. And we hope you'll join us again on, let me see when the next one is. I think it's October 19th. And we're going to talk about reducing fossil fuel reliance and green building. So I will be presenting on the green building ordinance, and we'll probably be talking about home electrification and solar, and possibly even embodied carbon in buildings and sidewalks. And if you don't know what embodied carbon is, you'll have to just show up and find out. So thanks everyone. We'll see you in October, and feel free to grab all those links before you leave in the chat and follow up. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good to meet y'all.